Anyone can speak with kindness when it serves their interests, but character is not measured during comfortable moments. Character is revealed through repeated choices over time. Toxic people eventually expose themselves through patterns that become impossible to ignore. They criticize more than they encourage. They create unnecessary drama and then pretend to be the victim. They shift blame whenever they are confronted. They make you feel guilty for setting healthy boundaries. They celebrate your failures more quietly than they celebrate your successes. None of these behaviors may seem dangerous on their own, but together they form a pattern that slowly weakens your confidence if you continue ignoring it. Think about how manipulation usually begins. It rarely starts with something dramatic. Instead, recognize toxic people before they control your minute grows through small emotional compromises. A toxic person may make sarcastic comments and call them jokes. They may dismiss your feelings and tell you that you are simply overreacting. They may constantly compare you to others while pretending they are motivating you. They may invade your boundaries but become offended whenever you protect yourself. Every time you excuse these behaviors without addressing them, you slowly teach yourself that disrespect is something you should tolerate. Over time, what once I felt unacceptable begins to feel normal, and that is exactly how toxic influence gains strength. One of the most dangerous effects of toxic people is that they slowly change the way you think about yourself. Instead of questioning their behavior, you begin questioning your own judgment. You wonder whether you are asking for too much. You wonder whether you are too sensitive. You wonder whether the problem is somehow your fault. This psychological confusion is clear as throat, not an accident. Many toxic individuals survive by making other people doubt themselves. A person who no longer trusts their own instincts becomes much easier to manipulate because they constantly look to someone else for reassurance. Powerful people refuse to surrender that kind of control. They understand that awareness is one of the strongest forms of self-defense. Instead of becoming emotionally attached too quickly, they observe carefully. They pay attention to how someone behaves when they are frustrated, how they treat people who have nothing to offer them, and whether their actions remain consistent when no one is watching. They know that genuine integrity does not change depending on the situation. Someone who repeatedly creates conflict, spreads negativity, refuses responsibility, or constantly drains your emotional energy is revealing their true character through actions, not opinions. Another important lesson is learning the difference between a difficult person and a toxic person. Every human being has flaws. Everyone experiences stress, failure, and emotional struggles. A difficult person may make mistakes, but they are willing to learn, apologize, and grow. A toxic person, however, repeatedly avoids responsibility while expecting everyone else to adapt to their behavior. They continue the same destructive patterns because those patterns benefit them. Once you understand this difference, you stop wasting your energy trying to fix people who have no intention of changing. This does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone you meet. Life requires trust, compassion, and meaningful relationships, but wisdom requires balance. You can remain kind without becoming naive. You can remain compassionate without ignoring repeated disrespect. You can give people opportunities while still recognizing when their consistent behavior has already given you the answer. Protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of self-respect. Every moment spent under the influence of a toxic person is a moment that could have been invested in becoming stronger, wiser, and more emotionally free. The truth is simple. Toxic people become powerful only when you fail to recognize them early enough. The moment you stop judging people by their promises and start judging them by their patterns, everything changes. You make better decisions, build healthier relationships, and protect your confidence before manipulation has the opportunity to take root. Awareness is not about living in fear of people. It's about refusing to ignore the evidence that is already in front of you. And once you learn to recognize toxic people before they influence your thinking, the next step is learning how to control your emotions. Because no toxic person can dominate someone who refuses to surrender their inner peace. Recognizing toxic people is only the beginning. Awareness protects you from walking blindly into manipulation. Future cognition alone is not enough to keep you safe. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is to make sure they never gain control over your emotions. This is where many people lose their power. They correctly identify toxic behavior, yet they continue allowing that behavior to dictate their mood, their decisions, and their peace of mind. The moment someone can consistently control how you feel, they hold influence over your life, whether you realize it or not. Real strength is not found in controlling toxic people. It is found in refusing to let toxic people control you. Robert Greene often emphasizes that those who master themselves become far more difficult to manipulate than those who constantly react to the world around them. Toxic individuals understand this principle, even if they never explain it. They know that the easiest person to influence is the one who reacts emotionally to every criticism, every insult, every moment of rejection, and every act of disrespect. That is why they often create situations designed to provoke you. Sometimes they use anger, sometimes they use guilt, sometimes they remain silent just to make you anxious. The method changes, but the objective remains the same. They want your emotions to become predictable, because predictable emotions are easier to control. Think about how easily one negative comment can dominate an entire day. You may receive 10 compliments and one criticism, yet your mind keeps returning to the criticism. Toxic people understand this tendency in human nature. They know that emotional discomfort captures attention more powerfully than emotional comfort. Because of this, they intentionally create confusion, conflict, or insecurity, hoping you will spend your energy trying to gain their approval or defend yourself. Before long, you are no longer focused on your goals, your family, or your future. You are focused in managing someone else's behavior. That is the moment your emotional freedom begins to disappear. Many people believe emotional control means suppressing feelings, but that is not true. Suppressed emotions eventually return with greater intensity. Emotional mastery begins by acknowledging your feelings without allowing them to control your actions. You may feel disappointed when someone disrespects. Never give toxic people control over your emotions. You may feel frustrated when someone spreads negativity or treats you unfairly. Those emotions are natural. The mistake is allowing those temporary feelings to determine permanent decisions. Emotion should inform your awareness, not command your behavior. One of the most common traps toxic people create is emotional guilt. They make you feel responsible for problems they created themselves. They twist conversations until you begin apologizing for defending your own boundaries. They portray themselves as victims whenever they are confronted with the consequences of their actions. If you're not emotionally disciplined, you may spend years carrying burdens that never belonged to you in the first place. This is why learning to separate responsibility from manipulation is one of the smartest decisions you can make. You are responsible for your own behavior, your own words, and your own choices. You are not responsible for constantly fixing people who refuse to take responsibility for themselves. Another powerful lesson is learning to pause before reacting. Toxic people often expect immediate emotional responses because those reactions reveal your weaknesses. When you answer every insult instantly, argue over every accusation, or defend yourself against every false claim, you unknowingly allow them to direct your attention. But when you develop the discipline to pause, breathe, and think before responding, everything changes. A calm mind sees opportunities that an emotional mind cannot. Instead of becoming trapped in unnecessary conflict, you begin making decisions based on wisdom rather than impulse. There is also great power in understanding that not every opinion deserves your emotional investment. Some people criticize because they genuinely want to help you grow. Their words may be difficult to hear, but they come from honesty and respect. Toxic criticism is different. Its purpose is not improvement, but control. It attacks your confidence instead of strengthening your character. Emotionally mature people learn to distinguish between constructive feedback and destructive manipulation. They accept useful criticism with humility while refusing to carry insults that serve no purpose beyond creating insecurity. The strongest people are not those who never experience anger, disappointment, or frustration. They are the ones who refuse to let those emotions become permanent residents in their minds. They understand that holding on to resentment gives toxic people free space inside their thoughts long after the conversation has ended. Choosing peace does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means refusing to allow someone else's negativity to shape your future. Every minute spent replaying toxic conversations is a minute taken away from building the life you truly want. This emotional discipline also changes the way toxic people respond to you. Individuals who thrive on provoking reactions often lose interest when they realize they can no longer disturb your inner peace. They may continue their behavior, but it stops having the same effect because your emotional stability no longer depends on their approval, their criticism, or their attention. That quiet confidence becomes your greatest protection. It cannot be manipulated because it comes from within rather than from the opinions of others. Remember, the smartest way to deal with toxic people is not to become as toxic as they are. It is to become so emotionally disciplined that their attempts to control your mood no longer succeed. When you master your reactions, you protect your confidence, preserve your peace, and keep your attention focused on the life you are building instead of the chaos they create. And once you learn to protect your emotions from toxic people, the next step is building firm boundaries. Because emotional strength becomes truly effective only when it is supported by the courage to decide who deserves access to your life. Once you recognize toxic people and learn to control your emotional reactions, there is one lesson that determines whether your peace will last or disappear. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is to establish boundaries that protect your time, your energy, and your self-respect. Many people believe boundaries are walls built to push others away, but that is a misunderstanding. Healthy boundaries are not designed to isolate you from people. They are designed to protect you from relationships that slowly destroy your confidence. Without boundaries, even the strongest mindset eventually becomes exhausted because constant exposure to toxic behavior drains emotional strength over time. One of the greatest misconceptions about kindness is the belief that being a good person means saying yes to everything. Many people are taught that sacrifice is always a virtue and that refusing someone's demands is selfish. Toxic individuals recognize this mindset and often use it to their advantage. They rely on guilt more than force. They expect you to constantly adjust your schedule, ignore your own needs, forgive repeated disrespect, and remain available no matter how they treat you. Over time, your generosity becomes something they expect instead of something they appreciate. What began as kindness slowly turns into permission for exploitation. Robert Greene often points out that power is closely connected to limits. People naturally test the boundaries they are given. If no limits exist, many will continue taking more than they should. This is not always because they are evil. Sometimes it is simply human nature. That is why boundaries are so important. They quietly teach people how they are allowed to treat you. Every time you consistently protect your standards, you reinforce your self-respect. Every time you repeatedly ignore those standards, you send the opposite message that your limits can be crossed without consequence. Think about someone who constantly interrupts your peace. They demand your attention whenever it is convenient for them, but disappear when you need support. They criticize your choices, but become defensive whenever you question theirs. They expect unlimited patience while offering very little understanding in return. If you continue accepting this behavior without establishing clear limits, the situation rarely improves. In most cases, it becomes worse because people often repeat what they believe they can get away with. The absence of boundaries set boundaries that protect your peace encourages repeated disrespect. One of the hardest parts of setting boundaries is accepting that not everyone will like them. Toxic people often become uncomfortable the moment you stop allowing behavior they once benefited from. They may accuse you of changing, becoming selfish, or caring less than you used to. This reaction confuses many people because they mistake resistance for proof that they are doing something wrong. In reality, the opposite is often true. When someone only values you while you ignore your own needs, they are not respecting you. They are respecting the access they once had to your time and emotional energy. This is why boundaries require courage. It is easy to protect your standards when everyone agrees with them. The real challenge comes when saying no risks disappointing someone. Emotionally mature people understand that temporary discomfort is sometimes necessary to protect long-term peace. They know that avoiding one difficult conversation today often creates years of unnecessary frustration tomorrow. Instead of fearing conflict, they fear losing themselves by constantly sacrificing their values to keep others comfortable. Healthy boundaries are not loud or aggressive. They do not require endless arguments or dramatic announcements. They are communicated clearly, respectfully, and consistently. Sometimes a simple no is enough. Sometimes creating distance is enough. Sometimes choosing not to participate in unnecessary conflict is enough. The strength of a boundary does not come from the volume of your voice. It comes from your willingness to consistently enforce what you have decided. A boundary without consistency quickly becomes a suggestion, and toxic people are often quick to recognize the difference. Another important truth that boundaries protect both your relationships and your peace. Healthy people usually respect honest limits because they understand that mutual respect creates stronger connections. Toxic people, however, often react negatively because boundaries remove the control they once enjoyed. This response becomes valuable information. It reveals who appreciates you as a person and who only appreciated unrestricted access to your life. Instead of fearing that boundaries will drive people away, recognize that they often reveal which relationships are worth keeping. There is also a deeper psychological benefit to establishing clear limit. Every time you defend your boundaries, you strengthen your trust in yourself. You prove that your feelings matter. Your time has value and your peace deserves protection. This quiet confidence grows with every decision you make. Instead of constantly wondering whether you are asking for too much, you begin understanding that respect is not something you beg for. It is something you demonstrate by refusing to tolerate repeated disrespect. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is not to spend your life trying to change their behavior. It is to control what you allow into your life. Boundaries shift your focus away from controlling others and toward taking responsibility for your own decisions. That shift changed everything. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can endure and start measuring it by how well you protect your values. The result is not isolation, but freedom. The freedom to invest your energy in people who genuinely respect your presence rather than constantly testing your limits. When your boundaries become stronger than your fear of disappointing others, toxic people lose one of their greatest sources of influence. They can no longer manipulate your kindness, consume your time, or quietly erode your confidence because you have made one powerful decision. Your peace is no longer negotiable. And once your boundaries become firm enough to protect your peace, the next step is learning why silence and distance often accomplish far more than endless arguments with people who have no intention of changing. Once you recognize toxic people, learn to control your emotions and establish strong boundaries. There is one final mistake that many people continue to make. They believe they must defeat toxic people through arguments, explanations, or constant confrontation. But the smartest way to deal with toxic people is often the exact opposite. It is understanding that silence and distance can accomplish what endless conflict never will. Not every battle deserves your attention, and not every person deserves access to your peace. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to participate in the game they're trying to make you play. One of the defining characteristics of toxic people is that they thrive on emotional reactions. They are not always looking for solutions. More often, they are looking for control. Every argument gives them another opportunity to twist your words. Every emotional response gives them another chance to provoke you. Every explanation invites another accusation. Before long, you realize you are no longer having a conversation. You are trapped in a cycle that never leads anywhere. That is exactly why silence becomes so powerful. Silence interrupts the pattern they depend on. It denies them the emotional reaction they expected and protects your energy from being wasted on conversations that were never meant to produce understanding. Robert Greene often teaches that true power belongs to those who understand when to act and when to remain still. Most people believe strength is always loud. They think confidence means having the last word, winning every debate, or proving everyone wrong. But history repeatedly shows that emotionally disciplined people rarely waste their energy trying to convince those who have already decided not to listen. They understand that some people are committed to misunderstanding you because misunderstanding gives them an excuse to continue their behavior. In those situations, more words rarely create more clarity. They simply create more opportunities for manipulation. Think about how many hours people lose trying to defend themselves against toxic individuals. They replay conversations in their minds, write long messages explaining their intentions, and constantly search for the perfect words that will finally make the other person understand. But the problem is not usually a lack of communication. The problem is a lack of willingness to communicate honestly. A toxic person often hears your words perfectly well. They simply choose to ignore the parts that require accountability. Instead, they shift the focus back onto you. Why silence and distance are more powerful than argument, forcing you to defend yourself while avoiding responsibility for their own actions. The conversation continues, but nothing ever changes. This is why silence should never be confused with weakness. Silence is not surrender, it is discipline. It is the ability to resist the temptation to prove yourself to people who have already decided they will not appreciate your truth. Anyone can react immediately when emotions are high. Very few people possess the patience to remain calm, observe the situation clearly, and refuse to be drawn into unnecessary conflict. That quiet discipline often protects your peace far more effectively than any clever argument ever could. Distant carries the same power. Many people remain close to toxic individuals because they fear loneliness more than they fear emotional exhaustion. They continue showing up in relationships, friendships, or environments that repeatedly damage their confidence because they hope things will somehow improve. But hope without evidence becomes a trap. Every day spent in unnecessary negativity slowly shapes the way you think, speak, and see yourself. The people closest to you influence your habits, your mindset, and your emotional health. If someone consistently fills your life with conflict, criticism, manipulation, or chaos, creating distance is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of wisdom. One of the hardest lessons in life is accepting that you cannot heal every relationship. Some people do not want peace because conflict gives them attention. Some do not want solutions because blame protects their ego. Others repeat destructive behavior because it has worked for them for years. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is recognizing that your responsibility is not to change them. Your responsibility is to protect your own character while refusing to become like them. The moment you stop carrying the impossible burden of fixing everyone, you begin experiencing a freedom that arguments could never provide. This does not mean avoiding every difficult conversation. Healthy relationships require honesty, accountability, and open communication. When two people genuinely respect each other, even uncomfortable conversations can strengthen trust. But wisdom lies in recognizing the difference between a relationship that seeks resolution and one that survives on conflict. If someone repeatedly ignores your honesty, dismisses your boundaries, and twists every conversation into another opportunity for manipulation, continuing to argue rarely produces a different outcome. At that point, your silence becomes a declaration that your peace is more valuable than winning an unwinnable battle. There is another important psychological truth. Distance gives you perspective. While you remain constantly surrounded by toxic behavior, it becomes difficult to see clearly. You begin adapting to unhealthy patterns until they feel normal. But when you step back, your thinking becomes calmer. You begin recognizing how much emotional energy you were spending on problems that never belonged to you. The chaos that once controlled your daily life loses its grip because you are no longer standing in the middle of it. Distance does not merely separate you from toxic people, it reconnects you with yourself. The strongest people understand that every unnecessary argument steals time from their purpose. Every attempt to convince toxic individuals to become different delays their own growth. Instead of investing endless energy in people who refuse to change, they invest that energy in becoming wiser, healthier, more disciplined, and emotionally stronger. Their silence is not empty. It is filled with purpose. Their distance is not avoidance. It is protection. They choose growth over conflict because they know their future deserves more attention than someone else's negativity. Remember, the smartest way to deal with toxic people is not to defeat them in every conversation. It is to become so emotionally disciplined that you no longer feel the need to participate in battles that only drain your peace. When you master silence and choose distance where necessary, you stop giving toxic people the attention they rely on and start giving yourself the freedom you deserve. And once you understand the power of silence and distance, the next step is learning why trying to change toxic people is often the biggest mistake you can make and why your greatest investment should always be your own growth instead. After learning to recognize toxic people, master your emotions, establish strong boundaries, and use silence and distance wisely, unethical illusion must be abandoned if you truly want lasting peace. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is to stop believing that it is your responsibility to change them. This is one of the most painful lessons in human nature because many people genuinely believe that enough love, enough patience, or enough sacrifice can transform someone who refuses to transform themselves. While compassion is a beautiful quality, compassion without wisdom often becomes self-destruction. You cannot force growth upon someone who has chosen comfort over accountability. Many people stay trapped in toxic relationships because they fall in love with potential instead of reality. They remember the kind words they heard in the beginning, the promises that were made, or the brief moments when everything seemed different. They convince themselves that the person they care about is still hidden somewhere beneath the manipulation, dishonesty, or constant negativity. Because of this hope, they continue investing time, energy, and emotional strength into someone who repeatedly demonstrates that they have no intention of changing. Instead of accepting consistent actions, they cling to occasional moments of kindness and ignore the larger pattern unfolding before them. Robert Greene often reminds us that people reveal their true nature through repeated behavior, not temporary emotion. Anyone can apologize after creating damage. Anyone can promise to improve after facing consequences. Anyone can behave differently for a few days when they fear losing something valuable. But genuine change is measured by consistency. It is reflected in actions repeated over weeks, months, and years, not in emotional speeches matted during moments of crisis. The smartest people do not judge others by what they say they will become. They quietly observe who they repeatedly choose to be. One of the greatest traps toxic people create is giving just enough hope to keep you emotionally invested. Every time you begin thinking about walking away, they suddenly become more attentive. They apologize, make promises, or remind you of happier times. For a brief period, everything seems better. You begin believing that this time will be different. Then slowly, the old patterns return. The stop trying to change toxic people criticism comes back. The manipulation returns. The disrespect quietly reappears. Before long, you find yourself trapped in the exact same cycle, wondering how you ended up there once again. This pattern is exhausting because it keeps your emotions tied to possibility instead of reality. Think about how much of your life can disappear while waiting for someone else to become the person they keep promising to be. Months become years, opportunities are missed, confidence slowly fades. Instead of building year-round future, you become focused on repairing someone else's choices without realizing it. Your identity begins revolving around rescuing another person instead of developing yourself. The tragedy is not only that they fail to change. The tragedy is that you postpone your own growth while hoping they eventually will. This does not mean people are incapable of changing. Human beings can grow in remarkable ways when they accept responsibility for their actions and genuinely commit to becoming better. But there is one truth you must never forget. Real change always begins from within. It cannot be forced through pressure, guilt, constant advice, or endless sacrifice. If someone refuses to acknowledge their behavior, every attempt to rescue them becomes another opportunity for them to avoid responsibility. In trying to carry their burden, you accidentally make it easier for them to continue living exactly always have. Another important lesson is recognizing the difference between supporting someone and saving Samion. Supporting a person means encouraging them while they actively work toward becoming better. Saving a person means trying to do the work they refuse to do themselves. The first creates healthy relationships built on mutual effort. The second creates emotional dependence, frustration, and exhaustion. Toxic people often become comfortable allowing others to carry responsibilities they never intend to accept. The more you rescue them, the less motivation they have to change because someone else continues paying the emotional price for their decisions. Powerful people understand that their energy is one of their greatest resources. They protect it carefully because they know every hour spent chasing impossible change is an hour taken away from their own purpose. Instead of asking, how can I make this person different? They begin asking, how can I become wiser because of this experience? That single shift transforms everything. You stop living as a victim of someone else's behavior and start becoming the architect of your own future. The energy once wasted on frustration is redirected toward learning, healing, building discipline, and creating a meaningful life. There is also a deep sense of freedom that comes from accepting reality exactly as it is. Acceptance does not mean approving of toxic behavior. It simply means refusing to argue with the truth. If someone's consistent actions reveal manipulation, dishonesty, disrespect, or emotional abuse, believe the evidence in front of you. Stop waiting for imaginary versions of people who only exist in your hopes. When you accept reality, your decisions become clearer because they are based on facts instead of wishes. That clarity protects your confidence and prevents unnecessary disappointment. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is not by sacrificing yourself in an endless attempt to save them. It is by recognizing that your responsibility is to protect your character, your peace, and your future. You cannot control another person's willingness to grow, but you can control whether you continue allowing their choices to shape your life. Every moment you invest in becoming stronger is a moment that no toxic person can take away from you. And once you stop trying to change toxic people, the final step is becoming so emotionally strong, purposeful, and confident that their presence no longer has the power to influence the direction of your life. Everything you have learned until this point leads to own eternal truth. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is not simply recognizing them, controlling your emotions, setting boundaries, using silence, or accepting that you cannot change them. Those are all powerful lessons, but they are only preparation for the greatest transformation of all. Real victory comes when you build a life so strong that toxic people lose the ability to influence your thoughts, your decisions, and your future. The highest level of personal power is not making toxic people regret losing you. It is reaching a point where their approval, criticism, or presence no longer determines how you live your life. Many people believe the goal is to escape toxic people, but that is only part of the journey. You can walk away from a toxic relationship and still carry the emotional weight of it for years. You can create physical distance while remaining mentally trapped by resentment, fear, or the constant need to prove yourself. That is why true freedom begins within. It is achieved when your confidence is no longer borrowed from other people's opinions, but built through your own discipline, character, and purpose. When your identity is rooted in who you are instead of how others treat you, toxic people lose their greatest source of power over you. Robert Greene often reminds us that the strongest individuals are those who master themselves before attempting to master the world around them.